If you look at Coruscant in the movies, you'd think it was simply a city covering the entire planet. However, the city we see is actually just the first layer, and beneath it lay countless layers of levels where the further down you go, the worse the conditions for the population goes. Mind you, sunlight was only visible for the upper levels. With over 5,000 levels, we'll go through every single one we know of, starting with level 5127 all the way to level 0, the lowest level on Coruscant. With over 5,000 levels and rising approximately 15 kilometers above the planet's original surface, level 5127 was the highest level on Coruscant. Sunlight easily penetrated this level, and the air was natural, unlike the lower levels, where sunlight rarely reached and aging filtration systems were required to recycle the air. Level 5127 was home to high-ranking government officials, senators, diplomats, and the extremely wealthy, who could afford to live there comfortably. The rich often hosted extravagant events in penthouses. It was also the location of some of the planet's most important structures, including the Jedi Order's Jedi Temple, the Senate District, the Senate Rotunda, and public parks such as the Garden of Equality and Justice. The Senate District contained apartments and high-security complexes near the Senate building, while the Senate Rotunda housed representatives from 10,000 star systems. After the end of the Clone Wars and the rise of the Galactic Empire, level 5127, which served as the planet's federal district, became home to the Compnor Arcology, a massive complex considered one of the key points of the district's Supreme Triangle. This labyrinthine structure housed various Imperial organizations, including the Commission for the Preservation of the New Order and the Ubik Turret. Even under the rule of Emperor Palpatine, the surface level maintained many of its social functions. However, locations such as the Jedi Temple were converted into the Imperial Palace, with its halls repurposed for administrative functions and as Palpatine's personal residence. Though lacking sunlight, this level served as a powerhouse not just for the lower levels, but for all of Coruscant. It was located just 127 levels below level 5127. The level was filled with thousands of technicians who lived there and worked in the rotating shifts as they monitored Coruscant's central power distribution grid, overseeing power flow and responding quickly to prevent system meltdowns. Its machinery had been running for centuries. The grid contained massive generators capable of producing enough power to illuminate entire star systems and even vaporize a city block if improperly handled. It emitted a low-frequency hum that could be heard throughout the entire level. The importance of this level became clear in 21 BBY, when the facility housing the power grid was destroyed by General Grievous's demolition droids on the orders of Count Dooku, in an attempt to sabotage peace talks between the Separatist Alliance and the Galactic Republic. This devastating attack caused a planet-wide blackout. Life support systems failed in hospitals, traffic control networks went offline, and crashes occurred across multiple districts, affecting thousands of people, homes, and upper city facilities. Believing the Separatists were responsible, the Republic rejected the peace proposal. Although the power grid was eventually restored, mandatory blackouts were introduced to conserve energy. This also led to bank deregulation legislation and accelerated clone production. Well, the General has been making additions to his collection for several years now, and if you're anything like me, you've probably imagined what it could be like to own a saber yourself. So that's why I started my own store called Stickman Sabers, with a singular goal in mind. Make sabers that look amazing, being inspired by iconic designs, but specifically built to actually duel with. No worrying about babying them, just pick them up and go ham. They're equipped with state-of-the-art pixel technology, giving off an incredibly bright light that will light up the darkest rooms out there. And obviously have that iconic hum, just feels right the moment you switch it on. And for a limited time, if you pick a collector's saber up, you'll also get 2 combat sabers for free. So, if you ever thought about starting your own collection, this is a pretty good place to start. Links in the description, and now, let's get back to the video. The lower levels were clearly the place where all the hard, dirty labor that kept the upper levels safe and beautiful was carried out. Level 4888 was no exception. It was a lower level referred to in Imperial-era records as the Manufacturing District, producing droid components and military uniforms. This level was inhabited by beings who had never seen daylight and likely never would, as they worked constantly within manufacturing factories. They did not take breaks, not because they did not want to, but because they were desperate individuals afraid of losing their jobs to others who were even more desperate. However, it was within these facilities that equipment was produced for the Grand Army of the Republic during the Clone Wars. Production was carried out efficiently and relied heavily on automated systems. Upon the rise of the Empire, TIE fighter components became the primary focus of production. Cassian Andor, using the alias Varian Sky and 3BBY, lived and worked on level 4888 in East Narcine. Level 4643 was a relatively unrecognized warehouse district. It was a place where goods were stored before being shipped to thousands of worlds. Cargo speeders were used to transport containers from landing bays to distribution centers. A profession had developed around hauling goods between these locations using cargo speeders. Some families, however, made this level their home, living in small apartments carved into old factory buildings. Going downward, there was less exposure to sunlight and an increase in the type of chaos found in the lower levels. Level 4120 was first mentioned in Thrawn, and level 4040 in the novel Reign of the Empire: The Mask of Fear. Without much difference in the type of living atmosphere across many levels as one goes deeper, places like level 3726 were heavily infiltrated by lawlessness and filled with criminal gangs such as the Corrupt Gang. Strangely, there's not much difference between that and saying Corrupt Gang, except that it's not in basic, but we clearly get the point. Operating out of level 3726, a member of the gang ordered two fellow members to fire at the Rebel Alliance YT-1300 light freighter Millennium Falcon, piloted by Nien Nunb and Lando Calrissian, as well as Imperial tie-in starfighters, in a bid to defend their territory during an aerial assault. Sharing a similar level of lawlessness, level 3321 housed criminals involved in illegal dealings and businesses. During the time of the Galactic Empire, their actions made life difficult for Coruscant security forces. They eventually struck a deal with a spice-addled holostar they had captured and interrogated, promising to keep his name out of the headlines if he led them to a spice den run by a dealer named Tak Drud. Law enforcement on the level captured surveillance holograms of the clientele using an undercover probe, gathering images and intelligence on the den. One of the security officers, Tenivos Devo, had a grandson named Exanter Devo, who later published part of his grandfather's case files in a book titled Scum and Villainy, Case Files on the Galaxy's Most Notorious, released in 34 ABY. Interestingly, Tenivos Devo himself was born and raised in level 3215, where he witnessed his father being constantly extorted by criminals. This experience ultimately led to his decision to join Coruscant's law enforcement. Structured with the intention of recreating a miniature version of Alderaan, level 3204 was known as the Alderaanian District. It was constructed by expatriates who replicated the architectural style of Alderaan within a compact environment. Although the project was expensive and faced many challenges, the final result was impressive. It featured towers built in Alderaanian style, artificial gardens with plants grown under UV lamps, and a simulated Alderaanian sun. Diplomats and artists seeking a taste of their homeworld without leaving Coruscant visited the level frequently. In 0 BBY, however, Alderaan itself was destroyed by the Death Star, and survivors living on level 3204 gathered to mourn their lost planet and loved ones. Grief and rage spread through the streets, causing the Galactic Empire to temporarily seal off the level under the pretense of conducting an investigation. Anandra Milan, a human immigrant girl from Alderaan, lived on the level with her family. She fled with her brother Santiago Milan as stormtroopers began arresting Coruscant residents of Alderaanian origin out of fear of rebel recruitment. While fleeing, they moved to level 3108 to seek help from their mother's old friend, but their mother never arrived. Unable to assist them, the friend directed them to level 2142 to meet a smuggler who could help them escape off-world. Their journey continued through levels 1997, 1996, and finally 1782, where they discovered a camp of fugitives who provided them with food and shelter. Level 3204 was eventually reopened after the fall of the Empire, but it was never the same. The buildings stood empty and the gardens had been destroyed. Entertainment levels refer to the levels below 3000, with levels 2908 down to 2685 among them. Levels in this category were filled with clubs, gambling establishments, and various illicit activities. Being far from the surface, these levels had no natural daylight. Instead, they featured towering holographic billboards several stories high that advertised shows and establishments. During the time of the Galactic Republic, Jedi sometimes visited these areas, particularly when pursuing bounty hunters, as the crowded streets allowed them to blend in and become difficult to track. At one point, before the Clone Wars began, Anakin Skywalker pursued Zam Wesell, a Clawdite bounty hunter capable of altering her physical appearance, into the Uskrew Entertainment District, where she fled into the Outlander Club. The Outlander Club was a popular venue in Coruscant's lower entertainment levels. It was frequented by both high-ranking citizens and individuals involved in criminal activity. The club offered drinks, music, and gambling. Criminals also sold illicit goods, including death sticks, a highly addictive substance sold in glowing cylinders. Because of the large crowds, fugitives could easily evade capture, which was why Wesell fled into the club. However, she was eventually cornered by Anakin in an alley, where she warned him about a larger conspiracy before being silenced. Within these entertainment districts also stood the Galaxy Opera House and elements of Coruscant's underworld justice system. Lando Calrissian and Nien Nunb also flew the Millennium Falcon through level 2908 while being chased by Imperial tie-in starfighters. When Anakin was still a Padawan, he was brought to Club Kassakar on level 2685 by Sheev Palpatine 3 years after Palpatine had become Supreme Chancellor. Level 2623 had nothing to do with entertainment. It housed prisons and detention facilities built into the city's structure. These prisons were designed for individuals who had broken the law and were held there until a decision was made regarding their fate. To avoid paperwork, escape risks, and lengthy legal procedures, offenders were often simply dumped into Level 2623's detention system. The prisons were dark and cold, with only light coming from the energy fields securing the cells. Years before the Clone Wars, a drunken Toydarian was arrested on level 1392 for disturbing the peace and was sent to the prison on level 2623 without a lawyer or formal trial. Although prisoners on this level were sometimes released, many eventually returned to criminal activity. Some were released due to overcrowding, while others simply vanished without explanation. Accessed via the Underworld portal, this level housed those who maintained Coruscant's essential systems behind the scenes. From atmospheric processors that ensured clean air, to water distribution systems supplying billions of households, the level kept the planet functioning without receiving credit or recognition. Replacement parts could also be purchased here. A local establishment known as Desi Noodles, which operated across multiple levels, was also present on level 2046, providing workers with affordable meals. During the reign of the Galactic Empire, payments for security services were harshly demanded by Imperial officers under threat of force. Shop owners who refused to comply often returned the next day to find their businesses mysteriously burned down, or their suppliers unwilling to work with them. The pressure placed on residents by stormtroopers to make these payments caused some families to leave the level in search of safer and less oppressive conditions. At one point, a plant owner refused to offer a bribe to Imperial officers overseeing inspections. As a result, his meatpacking plant, which employed hundreds of workers, was shut down after the officers declared it unsanitary. In 9 BBY, the level came under the oversight of Pauan Senator Daho Sejan. He ordered level 2046 to be closed and imposed a curfew. Those who failed to comply would be immediately incarcerated. Levels below 2000 were significantly darker and dirtier. Natural light was never seen, the air was stale and carried a metallic taste, walls were cracked, and buildings were heavily compressed. These levels were home to various gangs, and law enforcement agents rarely visited the deteriorating districts. On the shady level 1997, Anandra Milan and her brother Santiago Milan met a pair of criminals regarding employment, but were forced to flee when they spotted Imperial officers. When they escaped from the miniature Alderaanian level 3204 to level 1996, Anandra was saved from a stormtrooper by a Herglick criminal who threw the trooper downward. The Herglick later directed them to level 1782, where she and her brother met a group of fugitives. Rust, waste, and broken materials defined this level. Heaps of outdated and non-functional technology were discarded from the upper levels, forming towers of debris. It was purely a dumping ground consisting of twisted metal, broken droids, and damaged furniture. However, this did not stop some individuals from making a life there. Using scraps and junk found within the heaps, people built makeshift shelters. Some even made a living by scavenging through the piles of reusable metal and components, which they sold to various dealers. The environment, however, remained extremely dangerous. Towers of debris could collapse without warning. Toxic waste was present throughout the area, and droids with corrupted programming could not distinguish friend from foe, sometimes killing innocent people. Gang members also established territory in the most valuable junk zones. Children were even born and raised on this level, and they learned early, often before learning to read or write, how to salvage valuable materials. This level was where the Alderaanian siblings, Anandra Milan and Santiago Milan, were reunited after being directed by a Herglick criminal to a camp of fugitives. The junkyard level was clearly beyond the reach of Imperial stormtroopers and their oppression. Criminal activity on this level was on the rise, and a well-known crime story from the level began when the Pauan Zodu Onglo took part in a botched arms deal in 26 BBY. Zodu had connections across various parts of the lower levels, and for many years he managed to avoid capture through deception and careful planning. One night, while attempting to arrange a deal and sell a cache of weapons stolen from a Republic armory in a warehouse on the level, a firefight broke out between his men and Lieutenant Tenivos Devo's Coruscant security force. Blaster fire was exchanged between both sides until Tenivos flanked the opposition through a ventilation shaft. He then approached Zodu, pressed his blaster against the back of his head, and finally arrested him. In 34 ABY, Tenivos' grandson, Exantor Devo, referenced this crime-ridden level in his book Scum and Villainy, case files on the galaxy's most notorious, including an image from the case. Levels from 1500 down to the 1300s only grew worse, with crime lords such as Jalen Vrax operating in places like level 1523. Vrax, a Corellian from a wealthy business family, became deeply involved in criminal enterprises. Even fictional stories in Coruscant about crime and law enforcement pointed toward the lower levels, as seen in the Star Wars video game Star Wars Outlaws. In one case, a droid smith was interviewed by fictional holodrama detectives Glarnock and Yabasi about a robbery committed by droids. He claimed the expensive jacket he was wearing was a fake purchased on level 1420. However, Glarnock doubted that an ordinary droid smith could afford such an item. Later, Yabasi traced a blaster to a shop on level 1420, only to discover that no official record of the shop existed. Levels such as level 1392 were heavily patrolled by law enforcement and subject to strict regulations. It was on this level in 382 BBY that the drunken Toydarian was arrested at dawn before being transported to a holding cell on level 2623. His crime? Urinating on passing speeders. Beyond the widespread crime, some levels also contain notable cultural sites, such as the Vaba Blank's Midnight Den nightclub on level 1347. The nightclub attracted large crowds due to its regular live music performances. In 231 BBY, during the High Republic era, a private Republic detective named Cien Holt occasionally performed there with a band. Because she had vouched for a former human criminal named Kiefer Branto, who had chosen to reform and was placed on probation, she was assigned as his partner and given responsibility for monitoring him. Branto had previously been involved in gun running and bounty hunting, and was also a former member of the Nile, an anarchistic marauder group. During this period, Branto was assigned to a top-secret mission for the Galactic Republic, though Cien was unaware of it. The mission required him to associate with the criminal Urk Panga, a Narkoi, in order to determine his activities. Since Branto was still on probation, Holt monitored him through a tracking device. One night during a live performance at the nightclub, she kept watch on him after he met with Panga. She later followed Branto into the Stebark district, hoping to uncover what was happening. From a distance, Cien saw Branto and Panga meeting with a tall cloaked figure in an alleyway. However, after she accidentally made some noise, Branto went to investigate. Upon seeing Cien, he attempted to explain himself, but Panga and the cloaked figure fled. The two detectives pursued them, but moments later, Panga ran back from deeper in the alleyway and urgently warned them to flee. Before he could escape, however, he was shot from behind by the cloaked figure, who revealed himself to be Aratab Fal, a Tarnab working as an agent for a Nile marauder. Fal opened fire on the detectives as they attempted to escape, killing Branto. Cien was knocked to the ground and wounded in the hand by a blaster bolt. She managed to return fire, but Fal escaped, and she eventually lost consciousness. Unlike Holt, who operated undercover and avoided being influenced by the crime-ridden lower levels, the Twi'lek police officer responsible for crime control operations on level 1331 failed to resist the corruption of the underworld. During the reign of the Galactic Empire, level 1331 was overseen by the corrupt Twi'lek prefect Focus Soot. He accepted bribes from crime lords operating under his jurisdiction. Criminal activity increased throughout his sector, and he was even placed on the payroll of the droid Gotra, a group of repurposed battle droids that resented the Empire for abandoning them after the Clone Wars. As crime on level 1331 continued to rise and appeared to interfere with Emperor Palpatine's plans, Foka was summoned to the Imperial Palace alongside several members of the criminal underworld. Present in the courtroom were Hara Sisan, Deputy Director of the Imperial Security Bureau, Grand Vizier Masameda, Wilhuff Tarkin, and Darth Vader. Vader ordered the criminals to leave Coruscant or face death. During their confrontation, Vader claimed he knew the cause of the rising crime, and to prove his point, used the Force to crush Foka's heart. Home to Uret's Mark, a bar located not only in one of the roughest levels, but also considered one of the roughest establishments in Coruscant's lower levels, level 1329 was a place where almost everyone, especially those who frequented the bar, was guilty of something. Being labeled the roughest level was almost a competition among the lower districts, and Uret's Mark stood out as a trusted haven for criminals operating within the underworld. Regular fights also broke out in the bar, often serving as entertainment for customers. During the reign of the Galactic Empire, Han Solo and Chewbacca spent a week on level 1329, as mentioned in the canon junior novel The Mighty Chewbacca in the Forest of Fear. The duo were searching for work that would pay better than their usual smuggling jobs, which eventually led them deep into Coruscant's underworld. They had originally arrived on Coruscant hoping to secure lucrative opportunities through connections with the trade guilds, but this failed because they were already known as smugglers. Han and Chewbacca later visited Uret's Mark, where cheap food and drinks were readily available. The advantage of the establishment was that nobody asked questions, and deals were often sealed with a simple handshake, usually accompanied by an implied threat should either party fail to uphold their end of the bargain. The bar served greasy and salty Nerf nuggets along with various meats, which Han and Chewbacca ordered while scanning the room for potential employers. In a place like Uret's Mark, one was either the employer or the employed. Eventually, the two encountered an Imperial noblewoman named Alenka Alu. She sought their assistance with a discreet transportation job involving family matters, though she refused to provide many details. This immediately made Han uncomfortable, as he sensed the job would bring significant trouble. Despite his concerns, the pair accepted the offer out of desperation for credits, though the mission eventually went disastrously wrong. Level 1329 offered many illicit opportunities, but often at the dangerous cost of one's life. Level 1325 during the Clone Wars was a place where people who wished to remain hidden could easily disappear within the massive crowds. Even Senate security could not simply enter the level without a specific reason. Sadly, this was the level that ARC Trooper CT-5555, also known as Fives, chose to meet with Anakin Skywalker and Captain Rex after discovering the truth about the inhibitor chips and being accused of attempting to assassinate the Chancellor. Fives needed someone he could trust after uncovering this terrible truth. He knew he could rely on Anakin and Rex, though arranging a meeting with them would be difficult. Nevertheless, he secretly organized a meeting on level 1325 inside a hangar bay that lacked surveillance systems. After presenting his evidence to Skywalker and Rex, Fives was shot by Coruscant security forces who burst through the hangar doors. He ultimately died in Rex's arms. Housing abandoned warehouses and massive buildings, level 1315 was an ideal place for criminals to store legal and contraband goods. It was also the level Barriss Offee chose to hide her explosive nanodroids, and the same place where she lured Ahsoka Tano in order to frame her as the extremist responsible for bombing the Jedi Temple. In 20 BBY, a human woman named Letta Termund became upset with the way the Jedi had become soldiers and weapons rather than symbols of peace. Her husband, Jakar Bomani, was a munitions expert employed by the Jedi Order. She conspired with a mysterious Jedi to bomb the Jedi Temple and acquired explosive nanodroids from level 1315, secretly placing them in her husband's food. As a result, Jakar became a walking bomb and exploded inside a hangar within the Jedi Temple, killing 6 Jedi, numerous Temple workers and clones, and injuring several others. With Ahsoka Tano and Anakin Skywalker leading the investigation into the attack, Termund was brought in for questioning. She insisted that her husband would never commit such a suicidal act. As the investigation progressed, Ahsoka and Skywalker discovered nanodroids in Jakar's bloodstream. They immediately proceeded to Termund's residence, where they also found nanodroids hidden in the family's food. After a brief chase, Termund was recaptured and brought back for further questioning. Turmund refused to speak with anyone except Ahsoka. When Ahsoka finally arrived, Turmund revealed that a Jedi who had grown tired of the war had supplied her with the nanodroids. However, before she could reveal the Jedi's identity, she was force choked to death. This led to Ahsoka being accused of murder and eventually escaping from her holding cell into the depths of Coruscant's underworld. Level 1315 was filled with criminal activity and served as a refuge for some of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals. Ahsoka was able to move through the crowds unnoticed by concealing herself beneath a hood. While attempting to maintain a low profile, she encountered Asajj Ventress, and the two formed a temporary alliance. Ahsoka agreed to ask the Jedi Order to grant Ventress a full pardon for her crimes, while Ventress agreed to give up the bounty placed on Ahsoka's head. The pair later fled from Skywalker, Plo Koon, and the clone forces accompanying them. With assistance from Barriss Offee, who was secretly responsible for the bombing, Ahsoka and Ventress received information through a public holo terminal regarding the warehouse where Turmund had obtained the nanodroids. After disarming several clone troopers, the pair located the warehouse and eventually parted ways. However, Ventress was later ambushed in the shadows by Barriss Offee, who stole her clothing and lightsabers before confronting Ahsoka herself. During their duel, explosive barrels were ignited, drawing the attention of Coruscant security forces. When Commander Wolffe arrived, he found Ahsoka among crates of nanodroids after Barriss had kicked her into them, further convincing him of her guilt. Level 1315 did not prove to be the safe hiding place Ahsoka had envisioned, but it would not be her last journey into the lower levels of Coruscant. Being one of the most infamous places in the underworld, Level 1313 was a district overflowing with illicit activity. The level was so deep beneath the surface that it had long been forgotten after centuries of existence. It was filled with aging buildings stacked upon one another, their structures barely holding together. Mold spread across the walls due to constant moisture and poor ventilation. Level 1313 could only be accessed through the underworld portal, and was located 1,313 levels beneath the surface of Coruscant. This was how it received its name. It formed part of Coruscant's criminal underworld and became a center of widespread crime. Crowds filled the level, but gang members controlled the streets and oppressed residents through extortion and intimidation. Transactions on Level 1313 were conducted not only with credits, but also through favors. The level became the perfect hiding place for Ahsoka Tano after she left the Jedi Order and crash-landed inside a repair shop owned by the Martez sisters, Trace Martez and Rafa Martez. The sisters were residents of Coruscant's underworld, having been raised on Level 1313 alongside their parents. Though distant from the world above, they grew up hearing stories about the Jedi and admired them deeply. However, during the early stages of the Clone Wars, an incident occurred that left them resentful toward the Jedi Order for many years. A chase involving Cad Bane and the Jedi led to the deaths of their parents, and the comfort offered by one of the Jedi felt more like an emotionless excuse than genuine compassion. Despite the harshness of Level 1313, the Martez sisters worked hard to escape life in the underworld. Rafa operated a laundromat connected to shady business dealings, while Trace worked as a mechanic and slowly constructed the freighter Silver Angel inside their parents' old repair shop. It was within this repair shop that Ahsoka first met Trace while seeking repairs for her damaged speeder bike. Trace gave her the tools needed to repair the vehicle and allowed her to remain there as long as she could pay. After revealing her and Rafa's dream of leaving Coruscant, a debt collector named Pintu Sunel arrived alongside several thugs to demand repayment of Rafa's debts. The encounter highlighted the lawlessness of Level 1313, where violence often went unchecked. Overpowered by Pintu's thugs, Trace sought Ahsoka's help, and Ahsoka used her Jedi training to drive them away. Trace and Ahsoka later informed Rafa about the incident, and Rafa promised to clear her debts. It was also during this moment that Rafa was formally introduced to Ahsoka. Ahsoka later joined the sisters aboard the Silver Angel on a mission to deliver spice to Marg Krim and the Pike Syndicate on Obadiah. Upon learning what the mission involved, Ahsoka strongly opposed it, which angered Rafa, who intended to use the payment to settle her debts. This created tension between the two. Although Ahsoka disapproved of such criminal activities as a Jedi, the experience also helped her understand how people in the lower levels were often pushed toward crime simply to survive or repay debts. When the mission went wrong, Ahsoka rescued the Martez sisters from the Pikes. The trio fled into the surrounding city, but a Gotal who spotted them informed nearby Pike guards in exchange for credits, leading to their capture. To save the sisters, Ahsoka remained in custody and negotiated with the Pikes, promising that the sisters would return with the spice shipment. Recognizing her sacrifice, the sisters later returned and discovered that Ahsoka was a Jedi. Together, they returned to their hangar on Coruscant, where Ahsoka revealed she had left the Jedi Order, and Rafa acknowledged that Ahsoka behaved the way she believed Jedi should. After the execution of Order 66, the sisters worked alongside Captain Rex and helped the Bad Batch escape during a mission aboard the Silver Angel. From the depths of crime-ridden level 1313, the sisters were finally able to travel off-world and pursue the lives they had always dreamed of. Stories surrounding level 1313 did not end there. A doctor named Cornelius Evazan, who considered himself a brilliant surgeon but was in reality a sociopath, had death sentences in more than 12 systems due to his unethical medical practices. Many of his patients died during his botched operations. Evazan and his partner Ponda Baba were at one point pursued by authorities through Coruscant's underworld, including level 1313, before the Battle of Yavin. Individuals who lived on this level were mostly those hiding from authorities or conducting illicit dealings in secret. Level 1312 closely resembled level 1313. It was engulfed in darkness, its streets were controlled by gangs, fungus spread across the walls due to constant moisture, and many businesses struggled to survive. This environment made the level an ideal refuge for Asajj Ventress after she abandoned Count Dooku and became a bounty hunter. Ventress later encountered Ahsoka Tano, who was in hiding after being accused of orchestrating the bombing of the Jedi Temple. Ahsoka had been searching for a public communication booth in order to contact Barriss Offee, eventually finding one at 12th and G, not far from Ventress's apartment. This unexpected reunion led to Ventress and Ahsoka forming a temporary alliance. The incident also highlighted how difficult communication could be within the lower levels of Coruscant. In contrast, those living in the upper city would have greatly appreciated the ease and accessibility of the services available to them. Going deeper into Coruscant's lower levels, many areas became hazardous and completely uninhabitable. The infrastructure, buildings, and surrounding environments were unstable, and because these levels were so ancient, many of the systems that once sustained them could no longer be repaired. The air was much thinner in these depths, and rumors spread of creatures lurking within the darkness. Some even claimed that beneath level 100 lay lost treasures buried within collapsed buildings more than 10,000 years old. There were also rumors that hidden Imperial facilities existed in the depths below, where unethical experiments were conducted. On level 777, during the same aerial assault carried out by the Rebel Alliance between 3 ABY and 4 ABY, the YT-1300 light freighter Millennium Falcon, piloted by Lando Calrissian and Nien Nunb, passed through the level while being pursued by TIE fighters. However, while passing through level 128, one of the TIE fighter pilots crashed into a creature inhabiting the level, giving the Falcon an opportunity to escape before it could be devoured by the creature. By common knowledge, level 5 was considered the lowest accessible level, though this was not entirely true. The level was constructed with solid durasteel and duroplast structures built to endure for centuries. However, many of its aging infrastructures had weakened over time and begun to fall apart. Most of the structures found on the level dated back thousands of years to the early period when Coruscant first began expanding into a world-spanning city. The systems operating on the level were unreliable. Water flowed through pipes that had not been replaced for centuries, while the power supply had to be carefully managed because demands exceeding the grid's capacity often caused dangerous sparks and failures. As a result, outages were common and residents were forced to rely on backup systems and alternative means of survival. Level 5 became a refuge for those living in extreme poverty or for individuals attempting to hide from massive debts or warrants issued from the upper levels. The level was mentioned by Leia Organa while speaking with Amilyn Holdo, as Leia believed it was the lowest level they could safely descend to, effectively making it the lowest habitable level by common understanding. However, Holdo's adventurous nature later convinced Leia to descend further into level 4, revealing that Coruscant's underworld extended even deeper than most citizens realized. Level 4, according to official records, was a restricted zone and considered inaccessible, yet Amilyn Holdo and Leia Organa dared to enter it. As they moved through the level, they discovered crumbling structures and decay throughout the environment. Thick dust filled the air, making breathing difficult. While descending deeper into Coruscant's underlevels, Holdo stopped after noticing something on level 4 that got her attention. Although Leia tried to stop her, Holdo pressed on, leading them through a tunnel in search of the Lost Museum. Within a circus located on level 4, a dancer pointed them in the direction of the museum. Later, Organa discovered that her money had been stolen. As the duo continued their search, they were pursued by criminals who did not want outsiders uncovering their cargo restocking operations. This demonstrated just how crime-ridden and lawless Level 4 truly was. Upon locating the museum, they discovered ancient artifacts, relics, and statues, suggesting that Level 4 may once have been inhabited by some of Coruscant's earliest populations. Levels 2 and 3 were heavily restricted zones, with security barriers installed throughout, and only specially authorized individuals permitted access. Security droids were stationed across the levels to prevent any attempts to force entry. The official explanation given to the public was that the structures were unstable, prone to collapse, and filled with toxic gases. However, the true reason remained that the Empire did not want anyone discovering what had been concealed within these depths. Rumors spoke of unethical experiments in detention centers for political prisoners, though much of this remained unverified speculation about Imperial activity below. Despite the restrictions, some individuals still found their way into these forbidden levels, including urban explorers and treasure hunters. Some of them returned disoriented, while others never returned at all. Even when investigations were launched, many of the missing persons were never found, fueling further speculation. Built over 100,000 years ago, Level 1 was one of the earliest artificial platforms on Coruscant. At the time of its construction, the natural sky was still visible, and individuals lived without the need for recycled air systems. Over time, however, the atmosphere became increasingly toxic due to decaying construction materials, industrial waste, and centuries of environmental degradation. The oxygen levels eventually became insufficient to support most life forms, and the air grew hazardous to breathe. Those who constructed the level used long durasteel beams and reinforced it with duraplast foundations capable of supporting entire city blocks. This ensured that buildings and streets would not collapse under their own weight or that of structures above them. Many years later, the air on this level became lethal, and it was abandoned, eventually becoming both a wasteland and an archaeological site. Radiation levels in the atmosphere are extremely dangerous. Even with proper environmental suits, prolonged exposure can still be fatal. Level 0 was Coruscant's original surface. This was where mountains and oceans once existed before advanced construction transformed the planet. No natural light could reach this level, and the only sources of illumination were bioluminescent fungi and chemical reactions within pools of toxic waste. As the planet's original ground layer, all visible traces of Coruscant's natural surface had long since been buried deep beneath later development. The temperature was cold, the water was scarce, the small amounts that seeped through cracks were heavily contaminated with toxic chemicals and heavy metals. Completely hostile to life, Level 0 was also rumored to contain mutated creatures that hunt by sound and smell. These creatures were described as massive humanoid beings with enormous eyes, elongated limbs, claws, and bodies twice the height of a human. Having never seen sunlight, their skin was reportedly translucent. Due to the scarcity of food in the lower levels, they were said to have extreme appetites. Survivor accounts from individuals who had escaped encounters with these creatures formed the basis of several reports describing their appearance. Other rumors suggested they were failed experiments that escaped Imperial research facilities buried beneath Coruscant, originally intended to develop bioweapons. Another common rumor among Coruscant's inhabitants claimed that a rogue artificial intelligence operated in the lower levels, having assembled itself from ancient, discarded droids over time. From level 5127 down to level 0, Coruscant stands as a world that has progressively expanded through time, built upward layer by layer, maintaining its status as the center of galactic civilization for millennia. And that's it for all the levels we know of on Coruscant. Like and subscribe.